Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Kaftet. Today's daf is dedicated by Natalie Taylor for the refuah shlema of two women whom I love very much, Bracha Bar Rachel and Dvorah Shulamit Bat Yocheved Chana. May both these amazing women have successful operations this week and an easy recovery. And also I want to dedicate the daf to Shira and David Fishman and to the broader Denver community for graciously hosting us this past Shabbat in Denver and for offering me use of their house to also record the Shiur for today. And I just want to thank you all for the very warm welcome and the opportunity to have met you. So thank you very much. It's always fun to go around to places and meet people who are learning together the daf with us. Okay, we will now start our daf. We're going to finish the second parak today, finish the whole section on Sukkot that we've been dealing with, and moving on to the Arba'at HaMinim, the Lulav, the Etrog, the Hadassim, and the Aravot. So with that, we'll get started. We were in the middle of discussing Teshvu Ke'en Taduru. You should live in your sukkah the way you live in your home. We saw bring your nice dishes, bring your nice sheets, do all, even your learning inside, unless it's learning that you're going to have trouble focusing on, right? Iyun, which means basically learn Daf Yomi in the sukkah. Chag HaSukkot is coming up, so pay attention. You should all be learning in your sukkah if possible. And doing what you can, right? At whatever you can do in the sukkah. So we're going to have more discussion about this right now. Amarava, third line of Sukkah Daf Kaftet. Mane mishtia b'mitalalta. Mane michla bar mitalalta. Drinking utensils stay in the sukkah. Eating utensils outside the sukkah. What exactly does this mean? Some people say this means dirty dishes. Once your dishes are dirty, you don't keep them on the table anymore in your house. You bring them into the kitchen. Likewise, don't leave them in your sukkah. They're disgusting. Get them out. Whereas drinking you can leave because they're not dirty particularly. Some people say we're talking about serving utensils, that the pots and the pans you shouldn't bring out into your sukkah. That's what it means by mane michlia. Food utensils that you cook in, don't bring into your sukkah. You wouldn't bring that on your table. Some people might, I don't know, but most people don't bring the pots onto the table, certainly not when you have guests. So, right, there might be a difference when it's just your family, but you wouldn't bring pots to the table. Normally when you have guests, so don't bring them out into the sukkah. There's a bit of a difference of opinion what we're discussing here. Chatzba v'shachil bar mitalalta v'shraga ba mitalalta. Chatzba is earthenware vessels that they would draw the water in, and shachil are wicker baskets that they would use for drawing water also outside the sukkah. Okay, maybe this isn't exactly clear, but maybe also they're more serving utensils rather than the utensils that people drink out of. And the candle should be in the sukkah. Some people actually light their Shabbat and Yom Tov candles in the sukkah. Okay, could be it comes from here. But some people say no, candle outside the sukkah. V'lo pligi, and actually there's no debate between these two sources. Habasukkah gdola, habasukkah tana. One is in a large sukkah, one is in a small sukkah. What's the issue of a candle in a small sukkah? Some people talk about, and if you remember this from Masechet Shabbat, the candles were in this earthenware vessel. They would put oil in there and it would get disgusting and it had a bad smell. There were certain candles that had bad smells. We talked about that on Shabbat in terms of you might want to blow it out or talked about all sorts of issues. So some people say it's disgusting. And if you're in a small sukkah, you're going to smell it. It's going to cause a bad smell. Whereas if you're in a big sukkah, it won't be so noticeable. Some people say and then it's specifically after it's extinguished. Some people say that it's a fire hazard. It's dafka when it's lit that it's a problem, and it's fire hazard in a small sukkah, right? It might go on fire, or it might limit the use of your sukkah. If it's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, and then you put the candle, you're going to have to distance yourself from there, and then you'll have space that you can't actually use. Okay, next. Yardu geshamim. So now what happens if it rains in your sukkah? Tana. Remember we said once the current translates this as a congealed dish. Once your congealed dish becomes, it's something in between soft and hard, once it becomes ruined by the rain. So now they say it's grisim. It's made from groats, I think, or something would be the translation, or barley. Okay. Abai have a kayativ. They're describing what type of mikvah. Abai have a kayativ kamei Rav Yosef b'mitalalta. Abai was sitting with Rav Yosef in the sukkah. Nashav zika, a wind came and blew. V'kamaiti tzivuta, all little sorts of wood came falling from, maybe from trees above or from the schach. Okay, it started falling into the sukkah, little wood chips. Amalei Rav Yosef, panu limana mehacha. He says to Abaye, go, remember Abaye was his student, he said, go take all the dishes inside quickly. But Abaye says, but your food hasn't gotten ruined. Why are you going inside? He says to him, Lididi, for me, Kevanda anine da'atai, which often they use the word istinis in the Gemara, which is, I'm very particular, like this disgusts me. For me, this is like as if my food got ruined. So now you start to learn that this whole issue is somewhat subjective. If it's disgusting to me, then already I can come inside. If it's very uncomfortable, it's kind of like the mitzta'el, right? Which was different because then he himself was, but here it's this discomfort of the sukkah of there's wood chips falling into my food or nearby my food. Ugh, can't sit here. Tanu Rabbanit. Okay, bright. Now what happens when it rains and you leave your sukkah? When do you have to come back to the sukkah? Right? Very good question. So he was eating in the sukkah v'yardug shamim, and the rain came down, v'yarad, and he went down into his house. This is like we saw in the chuppah sugya about eating in the chuppah or the sukkah, and we said that the sukkah was up in the roofs. This is another proof that the sukkah was up in the roof because then people would come down. They'd come down into their house. You don't have to go back up into the sukkah until you finish your meal. If you were sleeping under the sukkah, which really means in the sukkah, and then it starts to rain. This has happened to us many times where we sleep out in the sukkah, and then all of a sudden, right, we have all these mattresses in the sukkah. It starts to rain in the middle of the night, right? We quickly bring in all the mattresses, bring in all the sheets. It's really not so fun. So you're sleeping in the sukkah, and it starts raining. And you came back into your house. You don't have to go back into the sukkah until it gets light, or with an aleph. So now the Gemara says, with an ayin, or with an aleph. Does it mean until you wake up, which is or with an ayin, or does it mean until it becomes morning? Right? It's a big difference. Could mean, you could sleep till 10 o'clock in the morning. You don't have to go back into the sukkah. Or, right, you might have to wake up at the crack of dawn and go back into the sukkah if it's not raining. Or it could mean, right, what if you woke up in the middle of the night and it stopped raining? Maybe you'd have to go back into your sukkah. So, right, there's all difference about whether we say one or the other. So Tashma, they say, let's learn from here. It says, Ad shia or v'ya'aleh amud hashachar. There's a brighter that says, until it gets light with an aleph and the sun starts to rise. So they say, wait a minute, tarte, that's two of the same thing. When it gets light and the sun starts to rise. So why would they say both? So it must be ad shia or with an ayin v'ya'aleh amud hashachar. It's kind of like both. It has to, you wake up and it's already light. So if you wake up and it's already light, then you have to go back into the sukkah. Now we read the Mishnah in one way, but what the Gemara is going to show here is that the Mishnah really could be read in two ways. If you remember, the Mishnah said, when it rains, you can see this as a mashal, right? You can see this parable. What is it similar to? It's similar to, I'll read the words in the Mishnah just so you have it clear. It's like a servant who goes to pour a cup for his master. And he threw the jug in his face. Now notice it doesn't say who threw the jug in whose face. So they say, who's throwing the jug in whose face? Is it that God threw the jug in our face, which is the way we understood it? That's kind of the water dripping down on us is like the jug of water that we went to pour for God. He's pouring on us literally like water on us. Or is it that we threw it in his face, meaning we didn't do it properly, right? Imagine the servant comes to pour the cup for the Rav, for his master, and he spills it all over him. Right? Now, what's going to be the reaction of his master? He's going to get very angry. So maybe the rain is God being angry at us that we didn't do the mitzvah properly. Maybe it's like we went to do this mitzvah of sukkah, but we didn't do it in the right way. And therefore, God is angry and he's punishing us. So let's see which is right. Tashma, learn it from here. Tanya, there's a braita that says, Shafach lo rabo kitono pana. It's really the way we first understood it, that it's like God throwing the jug back on us. And he says, sorry, but I don't want your service. I'm not interested. Tano Rabbanan. Now, since we're going to say that rain on Sukkot is a bad sign, it's a sign that God doesn't want what we've done. We haven't done things properly. We're now going to talk about other signs in nature that we take as a sign of we've done something wrong. And we're going to see different signs in nature, talk a lot about eclipses that are seen as bad signs. And whenever there was recently a few years, I can't remember now how long ago, but there was a big solar eclipse. There was also a lunar eclipse. And people always quote these sources when these things happen. Tanu Rabbanan, bizman shachama loka siman ra lechol ha'olam. When there's a solar eclipse, it's a bad sign for the whole world. Mashal lama davar domeh. What's a parable for this? Lemelech basar vadam she'asa seuda la'avadav. You can see why they saw this as a bad sign. First of all, darkness was always seen as a bad sign. Nowadays, when it gets dark, it doesn't bother us. We have light. But in those days, they were always scared of the dark. So they say it's like a king who makes a big seuda la'avadav. He makes a big feast for all his servants. And he put a flashlight, not really literally a flashlight, but a light up for all of them. He got angry at them. He said to his servant, take the light away. That's the way we view the sun. The sun is a gift from God. When he takes it away, he covers it up. That must be, he wants to bring darkness, which is always seen as bad to the world. And he let them all sit in the dark. Tanya, there's a brighter that says, Rabbi Meir Homer, here's a different approach. When you see eclipses of the sun, the moon, right, all the lights that are out there, that's a sign for the Jewish people, not the whole world, but for specifically us. Because we're the ones who often get punished because we sin a lot. And therefore, right, there's a certain approach to say, oh, we're sinners. Because of that, we get punished. And he's going to give a mashal again. Mashal is sofer shabala bet hasefer. It's like, I think here they mean sofer, like a teacher that comes to school, uritzu abiyado, and he's got a whip in his hand. Right? This is obviously in the days when they used to whip students. Mi doeg, who's worried about this? The one who normally gets hit, he's the one who's going to worry. Right? It's like when you're in class, if you're the goody two shoes, you're not really worried when the teacher comes and gets angry at someone, you're not the one in trouble. But you know very well if you're the troublemaker and the teacher comes in upset about something, you know that it's coming, right? They're coming for you. So here we're used to getting punished by God. It must be that it's a punishment specifically for us. This talks a little bit about our unique relationship with God in a sense, right? It's a bit of negative, but it means that we're the closest to him. We upset him the most, right? Also, there's that kind of approach to it. Tanu Rabbanan, bizman shachama loka. Here's another brighta about this. Okay, a different approach. When the sun has an eclipse, siman ra le'ovdei kochavim. It's bad for the pagan, for the idol worshippers. Livana, we'll see in a minute why. Livana loka, when the moon has an eclipse, siman ra le'sonehen shel Yisrael, for the Jews. By the way, I forgot to say this. We've seen this a number of times. Sonehem shel Yisrael means the enemies of the Jews, but it's really a way, we call it sagina hol, where it's the opposite. It really means the Jews. We just don't want to say it because we don't like to say, oh, the bad is coming to us, right? Like Voldemort in Harry Potter, right? Can't say the name. So here also, right? If you can't say the name, we don't want to say God is bringing bad things to the Jewish people. So we say to the enemies of the Jewish people, but it really means us. Why is this? Because they follow the solar calendar, we follow the lunar calendar. So the moon is ours, and therefore when it has an eclipse, it's a bad sign for us. When the sun has an eclipse, it's a bad sign for them. So we've seen different approaches. It's a solar eclipse, bad sign for everybody. Or are all these eclipses bad signs for the Jews? Or is solar for the pagans and lunar is for the Jews? Right? Obviously, it doesn't exactly matter because it's all a matter of how you take it, right? It happens no matter what. It's just a matter of how we view this. Is this coming to give us a message? Is it coming to give us and the universe a message? Or is it just particularly us, right? Either way, we have to kind of take it as a sign and we should do something to change our ways, right? This is the way of the rabbis trying to encourage people to change their ways, to become better people, to realize there are these outer signs that are telling you, wake up, be a better person. Okay, now this Braita continues. Right. If it happens in the east, okay, depending on where the sun is in the sky when this happens. It's in the east, it's a sign for the people in the east. If it's in the west, it's for the people in the west. If it happens when it's in the middle of the sky, then it kind of addresses everybody. Panav domim ledam. If the sun looks like blood, it's red like blood. Cherev bala olam. It's a sign that the sword is coming to the world, meaning, right, people are going to get killed by war. Lisak, if it looks blackened like sackcloth, which was made out of darkened sheep hairs. It's a sign that famine is coming to the world. I wanted to point out in last week's Haftorah, this pasuk came up very apropos. Okay, in Parshat Ekev, the Haftorah is from Yeshayahu chapter 50, and the pasuk Gimel in chapter 50 is Albish Shamayim Kadrut. I will cause the sky to be blackened. V'sak asim ksutam, and I will make their clothes sackcloth. So here, what do you see is parallel? The blackened skies and the sackcloth on the people, right? The skies will be dressed in black and the people will be dressed in black as well. You see that sak, which you don't always associate, right? It's mourning clothing, which by the way makes sense. Clothing of mourners is black. So it's interesting, the connection here. We'll make another connection to last week's Parsha as well, okay? This was to the Haftorah, soon we'll see a connection to the Parshat Ekev. Okay. Lizo, if it looks both red and black, the sword and famine will come to the world. Okay, if it's in the beginning of, okay, knisato means either when the sun is setting, that's what Rashi says. Others say it's actually when the sun is rising. Knisa, it's either knisa into the world or knisa into, right, back where it belongs, so to speak, right? But not really, but right, often we say knisat hashemesh is actually the sun setting. So that's how Rashi understands knisato. If it's beknisato when it's setting, we'll go with Rashi. Puranut shohalavo. It means the puranut, the evil is coming actually later. It's going to take its time in coming, just as it waited till the sun set to turn this red and black. B'yitziato, if it's at the beginning of the day, as it's rising, mimaheret lavo. It's a sign that it's coming quickly. Some people say the exact opposite, that at the beginning of the day, it's a sign that's going to take its time. At the end of the day, it's a sign that's coming quickly. Again, or it could be the reverse of the reverse, depending on which interpretation you go by. This is something very hard to understand for us. Every nation has its own angels in heaven. So when they get punished, the angels above that are associated with them also get punished. Okay, again, it's hard for us to understand this, but they're actually going to quote a verse, Shneimar, a verse from the Torah, Ubechol Elohei Mitzrayim eseh shvatim. With all the gods of the Egyptians, I will make shvatim, I will judge them as well. Okay, so this is in Shmot Yubet, Pasuk Yubet, right? I'm going to go that night, I'm going to kill all the firstborns. And then it says, and in all the gods of the Egyptians, I will make shvatim, which seems to be the angels above are also going to get punished. But if the Jews go in the way of God, this, by the way, reminds us of what the Ran said about doing mitzvot. As long as we're osek b'malachto shel makom, we're involving ourselves in what God wants, which is mitzvot, right? We surround ourselves with mitzvot. We don't have to worry about all these things. Shneimar, don't learn from the ways of the Jews, the Gentiles. And don't be worried by the signs of the heavens. Don't be nervous about them. Because the goyim will be nervous about these things, the Gentiles. Which means the pagans should be worried about these things. But Jews don't have to be worried about these signs. In other words, we have a solution to this. Our solution is keep in the way of mitzvot, and then those signs won't worry you. You don't have to worry. If this happens, you won't have to say, oh, this is a terrible sign. Something terrible is going to happen to me. Tano Rabbanit. B'shvil arba'at dvarim chamaloka. We're going to see a whole series of fours here. There's 4 reasons why there's a solar eclipse. Al-av beit din shemet ve'eno nispag kalacha. On the head of a beit din who dies and people don't mourn him properly, they don't eulogize him properly. Okay, and this is a way of God saying, I'm going to eulogize him, right? This is God's eulogy for him by closing the heavens or telling the people you've missed something, right? Your eyes were blocked off, right? The idea of this eclipse is blocking of the sun. Maybe he's saying you didn't notice something that you were supposed to notice. You were supposed to do something you didn't do. Okay, we'll talk about noticing in a minute, the next one. A girl who was raped in the city, and she screamed and nobody helped her, right? There's a verse about this, that when she screams in the city and nobody comes to save her, that's also people not noticing. So God says, you're not noticing? Well, I'm going to cover your eyes so you really won't notice. The next two are a little harder to connect to the idea of a solar eclipse and a little harder to swallow. Or at least the next one, Al-Mishkav Zachol, on homosexuality. Okay, when that people have sexual relations to men, okay, and that it's people who act upon it. And also that causes a solar eclipse. And two brothers that were killed at once. Okay, that's maybe just a terrible tragedy that happens. And then God has to kind of maybe cover himself, right? Cover up the son. Again, I'm not exactly sure the connection between those two things. It's true in the Torah, they talk about Mishkav Zachor as toeva, as something despicable. So maybe this thing that's despicable, that God wants things to be covered, not to see. I'm not sure exactly, right? The other ones where you missed something, you weren't noticing it. These are a little bit different. Maybe also they think that this is a problem in society. If society allows this to happen, maybe that's a possibility. Again, homosexuality is viewed very differently nowadays than it was then. I'm not going to get into that whole topic. It's a whole big, topic now for us to discuss in a Daf Yomi Shiur, but there's a lot to be said about that in general. There's 4 reasons why, again, this isn't just the sun, also the moon. Okay, other things have eclipses. Al kotvei plastel, these are people who write fake documents. They forge documents to try to get money out of people. Va'al mi'idei du checker, people who testify falsely in court. Right? These are people who they lie in order to get money. People who have sheep and small animals, goats, shepherds in Israel, that it's a problem if you breed these animals. Why? Because generally they take them to graze in other people's fields. They eat up the fields. Number one, it's stealing. Number two, it's an issue specifically in Eretz Israel because it causes the land to be wiped out. They eat up all the vegetation. But we'll get to this whole topic later on in Sanhedrin. It comes up in other places. And I think also in Gittim, we're going to learn about it. And people who cut down fruit trees. Okay, both these people are basically ending, right? They're causing to wipe out the vegetation in Israel, whether it's the fruits or the vegetables, things that are growing in Israel. Okay, now we're going to talk about the wealthy. Okay, there's 4 reasons. There's going to be 2 sources about the wealthy, Baalei Batim, or wealthy landlords, so to speak. There's 4 reasons why that can cause the wealthy people's money to be given over to the authorities. People who, if I have an IOU, let's say you owe me money, and then I loan you money, you give me back the money, but I keep the document, and then I claim again a month later or a year later that you owe me money and you never paid it back. Right? That's obviously underhanded. People who loan money on interest, which we know is forbidden by the Torah. They had an opportunity, and it's wealthy people listen to in general. Not always true, but often they have the ability, they have power, and they can use their power for good things. They can tell people, listen, stop doing these sins that you're involved in, right? They can get up and try to command authority, so they should use it for positive things. But they didn't stop people from doing sins. They just ignored it. This is interesting. This is people who claim, I'm going to give money for this yeshiva to build it. I'm going to give money for this shul. I'm going to, give money for whatever it is. And then they don't actually give the money. They just talk about it. Big talkers, but they're not doers. Okay. And they make themselves look like they're really wealthy and they're philanthropic, but in the end, they're really not. Okay, there's 4 reasons why there's 4 things people do, wealthy people, that will cause them to lose all their money. If they delay payments to their workers. If they oppress their workers, meaning they don't pay them at all. If they have responsibilities and they give it to, they say, I'm not going to deal with this. Someone else should deal with it. Okay, meaning many people say we're talking about communal responsibilities. They could do things for the community and they don't. They leave it to other people to deal with. And arrogance. V'gasut haruach keneged kulam, and arrogance is compared to all of this. In other words, that's worse than all the others. Aval ba'anavim ktiv, but with humble people, it says, va'anavim yirshu aretz. The anavim, the humble people, those are the ones that are going to inherit the land. V'hidgangu al rov shalom, and they will live in peace, right? I assume that means they will live in peace and enjoy their great peace. And with that, Hadron alach hayashen, we finished the second parak. Before we move on to the third parak, I want to say a few interesting things about this. First of all, I couldn't help but mention this book that I'm in the middle, that I just finished reading about after the Great Depression. And before I even get to the book, let me mention a question that the commentaries ask, which is, why is this only Baalei Batim? Right? Many of these things, to hold back money from your workers, to not pay them at all, that's forbidden for everybody. Why specifically Baalei Batim? So in this book I was reading about the Great Depression and what happened after in the center, in the Midwest, there were all these sandstorms and dust storms and terrible, their fields got wiped out entirely. And it's like all these signs from heaven. In fact, there were all these religious people who believed, we're having signs from heaven, God isn't helping us. And their lands were destroyed and they ran out to California hoping for a better future. And in California, they were met with these very wealthy plantation owners who totally mistreated them and abused them and turned them into basically slaves. And they would make money, but on credit, and they would only be able to use it in the store where they would charge them extra money. This horrible abuse, taking their power and abusing people with it and causing people to basically suffer more, right? And it was exactly this. Like, I couldn't help but notice the connection here of it's those people who have so much capability, right, to do such good in the world. They could have provided jobs for all these people. Instead, they provided jobs in such a demeaning way and really never allowed them. They kind of kept them captive within their poverty and never allowed them to properly get paid, to properly work, to treat them as mensches, right? And it's the wealthy. That's what it's talking about. It's not just, there's one thing to not pay your workers. That's bad. But it's another thing to abuse your position and use it to really, right, put people down. And that's really what they're getting at here. That's how I understand it. Second thing I want to point out is, why are we ending the second chapter in this whole section on Sukkah that we've been learning about with this idea of these signs from the heavens, right? So we understand we got here because we were talking about raining on Sukkot and a sign from God. But really, it's getting at this idea of Sukkot, the whole holiday of Sukkot, and leaving your Sukkah and to live outside is to say, we're dependent on God. We're not our own. Right? Baalei Batim, what's the problem? Arrogance is the worst. It's thinking I'm in charge of everything, and we're not. And that's where it connects with the parsha of last week. Don't say, oh, it's my strong hand that did it, right? The whole concern is when you get into the land, you're going to say, oh, I planted these trees. I worked my land. I'm in charge, right? It's all about me. And God is saying, no, you're not in charge. The rain comes from me, right? It's exactly also what it said in the parsha, right? Eretz Yisrael is a land where the rain comes from God directly. If you don't pray, you won't get rain, right? It's all, we're dependent on God entirely. And that's the idea of Sukkot, of living out in the Sukkah, this dependence on God. So it ends with this beautiful concept. Again, it's a little bit, it's said in a harsh way, but this idea of the importance of humility, right? It even ends in this beautiful pasuk. It's the humble in the end who will inherit the land. It's not the wealthy. They'll get kicked off their land eventually. The authorities will take their stuff away, but it's the humble people that will inherit the land. Okay, starting next chapter. Lulav hagazul, a stolen lulav. Vehayavesh, and a dry lulav. Pasul is disqualified. Okay, these are no good. Why are they no good? So lulav hagazul, Rashi says, and we should maybe start with this. The pasuk in the Torah that talks about the arba'at haminim, the lulav, and all the other things that go with it. Ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon. You should take for yourself on the first day. Pri eitz hadar, kapot tmarim, va'anaf eitz avot, v'arbei nachal. Those are the four things which they darshan out to be the lulav, the etrog, hadassim, and aravot. Okay, it's not clear. It never says those four words in the Torah. We just explain that all these things are. First thing to notice is the first one is pri eitz hadar. That's the fruit. That's the etrog. Notice how the pasuk starts off with the etrog, which is the most beautiful of all of them. But the Mishnah starts off with the lulav. So some people ask, why is that? Right. So a possible answer could be the lulav is the base, right? And then things come, right? The hadassim and aravot come out of there. In general, you say your lulav or your lulav and your etrog. But it's maybe because the lulav has 3 parts on it, that one gets mentioned first. But the Mishnah is often more practical. The Torah maybe talks about the beauty, whereas the Mishnah gets into the nitty gritty. Okay, well, when you need a lulav, that's where we bind it. That's all. That's a bunch of the things together. Maybe that's why they start with lulav. It's not so clear, but it's a good question. If it's stolen, why is it no good? So the Torah says, "Ulakachtem lachem," it has to be yours. We saw this by Sukkah, and we saw it mentioned about lulav as well. It has to be your own. So if you stole it, it's not your own. So we're going to see that the Gemara questions this after. One other important thing to mention before we move on is that according to Torah law, it's only a mitzvah to do on the first day. By Torah law, we say that in the temple, they would take it all 7 days, but outside the temple, it was only really on the first day. After the destruction of the temple, we'll see a Mishnah, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana, an ordinance that, or instituted that in order to remember the temple, we're going to take the lulav all 7 days, but it's not a mitzvah from the Torah to take it all 7 days. So therefore, we're going to see, the Gemara is going to start off with, wait, shouldn't this only be on the first day, not all the days? And the Mishnah doesn't distinguish between the first day and all the other days, and they're going to question that. Hayavesh pasul, if it's dry, it's disqualified. Whole interesting debate about what's wrong with a dry lulav. So I'll give you a little snippet about what the discussion is, but I recommend you listen to Gefet about this, which is going into depth into this issue of a lulav hayavesh. So it says here in Rashi, to be in a mitzvah mehuderet, you have to beautify the mitzvah, and to take a dry lulav is not a beautified mitzvah because it says ze'eli v'ambeu. That's a pasuk in Shemot about, right, in Shirat Hayam. This is God, and He should be glorified. So mitzvah should be done in a glorified manner. Tosfot says, what are you talking about? For that reason, you wouldn't disqualify it. Maybe you'd say it's better to do it if it's not dry, but you wouldn't disqualify the mitzvah because of that. So Tosfot has a different reason, and he says it's because lulav is like etrog, and by etrog it says hadar. Therefore, lulav has to be adar, because Tosfot basically says if you want to disqualify it, there has to be something wrong based on the Torah. It says the word hadar has to be a beautiful fruit. Also, then the lulav has to be beautiful. And since it's dry, it's obviously not beautiful. A dried out lulav will look disgusting. But if you've ever seen a lulav, if you leave your lulav, many people leave it to burn with the chametz on Pesach, it's really dry and disgusting, right? You wouldn't want to use that for a mitzvah, but not because of ze'eli v'ambeu, but because it says hadar, okay? To which they ask then, right, it's going to be a problem. If that's the case, maybe it should only be the first day. Anyway, there's a question about this. We'll get to that later. Shel Asherah, there's a whole bunch of other things about this lulav yavesh. Like I said, listen to Gefet. It's more in depth about this topic. Shel Asherah v'shel ir nidachal. Asherah is a tree that was worshipped. It was used to worship idols from. And Ir Hanidacha, which is a whole city that worshipped idols. Everything in the city has to be destroyed. Pasul, disqualified. We'll get into the Gemara why these are disqualified. Niktam rosho nifritzu alav. If the top of it broke off, or the leaves split entirely and they're no longer attached to the spine of the lulav, then pasul, then it's disqualified. A lulav, right, is a palm, right, where there has a big, thick spine and then tall leaves coming out of it. Nifredu alav, but if they just split, it often happens, the lulav splits in the middle, then kasher, it's still good. Rabbi Yehuda omer yagdenu milamala. If it splits at the top, you have to at least bind it together so it's not kind of falling all over the place. Tzinei hara barzel kshirot. The ones that come from palm trees in this place, okay, we'll see where there's a specific place where these would grow in Hara Barzel, it was called, the Iron Mountain. So those are okay. Rashi explains what's the issue with these. Well, their leaves are much shorter and they don't go the length of the spine. Okay, it's a different type of lulav, but that's still fine. Lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tvachim kedei lenanea bo kasher. Lulav has to have a minimum. Now we get to size, back to like our sukkah, 3 tvachim tall, in order to be able to shake it. So later, the Gemara is going to say this is actually 2 different things. It's 3 tvachim, and in order to be able to shake it, meaning 3 tvachim, Rashi explains, is the height of the hadassim, the myrtle branches that go with it. You need an extra tefach to be able to shake it beyond that. So the lulav has to jut out. Actually, it has to be 4 tvachim high, minimum, right? Ours are much higher than that usually, but that's the minimum size. So the Gemara starts off and says, Kapasik Vitane, the Mishnah doesn't specify, Losh Nabi Yom Tov Lishon, Losh Nabi Yom Tov Sheni. Very weird language. It says the Mishnah doesn't specify, it just blanket statement, doesn't start saying only on the first day and not the rest of the days. Okay, I say the rest of the days, it's not really what it says. It's not a proper translation. The translation is, but not only on the first day of Yantiv, but also on the second day of Yantiv. Now, what second day of Yantiv is there in the time of the Mishnah? There was only one day of Yantiv, they lived in Israel. So almost all the commentaries say what it means here is not the rest of the days of Sukkot. Why it calls it Yom Tov Sheni is very strange, but we'll have to just assume it means and not on the rest of the days of the holiday. So bishlama yavesh, I understand why a dry lulav doesn't work. Hadar b'inam beleka, it needs to be. And even if you're going to, right, the reason for using it all 7 days is just this takana zecher lemikdash, to remember the temple, but you're going to remember the temple by doing it the way they did it in the temple. You need a nice lulav. It's many people say, Rav Soloveitchik, I think was quoted saying, this is the definition, right? This is the cheftza. The yavesh is a problem in the cheftza of the mitzvah, meaning the lulav itself is problematic. So that's going to apply even to the takana. But ela gazul, but if it's stolen, bishlama yom tov rishon dichtiv lachem shalachem. The pasuk says ulakachtem lachem b'yom harishon. Take for yourselves, and it has to be your own on the first day only. And in fact, we learned that you can't borrow a lulav for the first day. You can for all the other days. The lachem only applies to day one because that's something on yourself, not on the lulav itself, but on yourself. You stole this. That's what creates it. The lulav itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with the lulav. It's just that you stole the lulav. So lachem shalachem, it'll be yom tov sheni amaylo. But what's wrong with using this on the rest of the holiday? It shouldn't be a problem. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He says, what's the reason? He says, mishum dahavele mitzvah haba ba'avera. I'm going to kind of leave you with here, but this opens up a huge, big, gigantic, important sugya, very basic sugya in Shas, which is the reason is not because of shalachem. It's because it's a mitzvah that you did through an avera. You stole something in order to do a mitzvah. That's not acceptable. We're going to understand where we get this from, and we're going to talk more about this in depth tomorrow. Does this apply to all mitzvot? Is this specifically unique to lulav and maybe things that are like lulav? There's a huge, interesting debate about this, but we'll get back to this fascinating topic tomorrow. And with that, I will leave you. Have a great day.